Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thank you so much for being here. Coming up, cannot wait, we're going to talk to Dr. George Barna from the American Worldview Study. They just released the results, and about how few Americans have a biblical worldview today. We'll talk about that in a minute. First, you've seen the Michael Bay movie trailer by now. Here's what Trump put out yesterday. That was our original show trailer for this show, and they just CGI'd Trump in afterwards. He stole it right from us. The left hates him so much. It's unbelievable. I watched the videos on MSNBC right when he got off the helicopter where he took his mask off, right? And the MSNBC anchor said that there's moments in this job when you are witnessing the great horrors of history. But him taking off his mask is one of the great horrors of history. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. That is a lack of perspective. We talked a bit about that yesterday. That is a lack of perspective, I'd say. Trump also, this is Michael Beschloss. He's a presidential historian, author of 10 books. He's a PBS NewsHour contributor. He said, in America, our presidents have generally avoided strongman balcony scenes. That's for other countries with authoritarian systems. And it's been great because now everyone's just tweeting out pictures of presidents on balconies. I got a bunch of them here. There's Coolidge, or Wilson. That's Wilson, maybe. There's FDR. And then there's you can just fly through them. Obama, there's like a bunch of Obama. Reagan, Carter, Bush. So you know, all of them. It's just nonstop, these guys, right? The conspiracy of the blank paper conspiracy from Walter Reed. I think we have a picture of that. And then the freak out. Can you believe he drove in a car with a Secret Service agent? They could die now. The fact that there's outrage yesterday about the timing of it all, that he lied to the American people because he didn't tell the American people that he tested positive the first time he took his COVID test. He lied, or it was just a rapid test, which aren't the most accurate, and then he waited a few hours to get the results of the more accurate test, and then he shared the results immediately following that. No conspiracy, no evil scheming, no deceit, no lying. It's just everyone freaking out all the time. And making you feel like you should be freaking out too. A strong man balcony scene. Where is all this insanity coming from? So I want to make an argument here. You could say that this is one of many factors. You could argue that this is a step in the progressive downfall. You could argue even that this is the factor. Actually, I could make that argument. But it is somewhere in the equation, and it cannot be overlooked. That is certain. And it's the factor of loneliness. Loneliness leads to extremism. First, we've never been lonelier. Surveys every year come out in the US and Europe, and it's somewhere between 30 and 60% of the population self-report feeling lonely and having no meaningful in-person interactions on a daily basis. Younger people feel more lonely than older people, mostly because of social media, which we'll get to in a second. There's a lot of reasons for this. Christian culture is a very connected culture, right? A lot of sharing, generosity, hospitality, shirt off your own back kind of thing, right? But we're less religious now, more than ever before. And you get a lot of people like, oh, I'm spiritual, but I don't believe in organized religion or whatever, right? Well, that means you're less connected, right? So even your religion is a more atomized experience. We have more urbanization, right? Kids moving far away from their parents to go to college, and then they move further away to start their life in a different place. So we have a society that pushes owning your own home, even living alone. There's a lot going on culturally that makes us more lonely. And then you pile on top of that social media. The lie was that social media will connect us. And yeah, maybe there's some connections that take place. There definitely are. My wife and I, we met through Facebook, sort of. But let me quote Mark Manson here. Mark Manson. He said, connections online and through devices seem to be a poor replacement for the emotional and psychological sustenance that we get from being around others. Social media and video games are like the diet soda of our emotional well-being. It tastes like we're hanging out with people, but there's no emotional calories. And in this case, no emotional calories is a bad thing. It's starving us. Pharmaceutical companies are trying to come up with a pill that can cure loneliness, okay? That's where we're at with this problem. So the question though, so we get it, like we know it's a problem, but how does it lead to tyranny, right? Why is it so destructive, like politically? Because we are social beings. We are social beings. We're designed to be social. We get our meaning and our purpose based on how we interact with others and our role in society. When we get isolated, when we get lonely, we lose that sense of meaning and purpose. And because we need it, we reach out and try to find something to cling to. And people tend to grab on to the most then radical things. Rejection and social isolation, which we've never had more of, radicalizes people. Hannah Arendt is a German Jew. She escaped the Nazis, like an incredible biography. She spent the rest of her life studying totalitarianism and fascism and communist revolutions, and specifically why these leaders become so popular. And she wrote a book called The Origins of Totalitarianism. And the gist of it is, it's a 700-page book. I'm giving the gist of it, right? But when you're lonely, you're more likely to find other people contemptible. You hate them more. So then we fragment more. And then we get rid of all the things that make our already very fragile society, they're gone. And that then leads to more extremism and violence. Let me quote a little from Hannah Arendt in this book. She says, the preparation for totalitarianism has succeeded when people have lost contact with their fellow men, as well as the reality around them. The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction and the distinction between true and false no longer exist. I mean, how much lately have we talked about how progressive postmodernism, there's no such thing as truth, no such thing as morality, no such thing as God, right? It's whatever you want it to be. It's however you feel. That's what Hannah Arendt's talking about here. But she wrote this in like the 50s. Terror can rule absolutely only over men who are isolated against each other. Therefore, one of the primary concerns of all tyrannical government is to bring this isolation about. Isolated men are powerless by definition. Not only have we been more isolated now than ever before, but now we're in COVID. And now even taking your mask off is one of the great horrors of history, right? We're more isolated than ever, and then you throw COVID on top of that. Totalitarian governments, like all tyrannies, certainly could not exist without destroying the public realm of life. That is, without destroying, by isolating men, their political capabilities, right? You don't want people to physically be around each other to organize physically. But totalitarian domination as a form of government is new, and that it is not content with with this isolation, with just the political isolation, and destroys private life as well. It bases itself, totalitarianism bases itself on loneliness, on the experience of not belonging to the world at all, which is among the most radical and desperate experiences of men. Loneliness is bad for your mental health, and it's bad for a nation's health. When you're alone, when you're isolated, when you're maybe rejected from society. And by the way, look at all these people, look at all these Antifa people. You look at their mugshots, and you're like, right? You're like these people are rejected from society, face tattoos and the whole thing, right? When you get rejected from society, when you're isolated, when you're lonely, when you don't have a place in the world, when you don't have a mission, when you don't have a purpose, you get bitter, become angry, You feel that nobody is reliable and therefore nothing can be relied upon, the systems and everything. So when that's the case, when that's your situation, what do you cling to? The most extreme thing. Revolution, usually. Back in the day, and by back in the day, I mean like 20 years ago, but also like forever ago. You live in a small town, you live in a small tribe. I grew up in a town of like 3,000 people or something. So you live in this small town, small tribe. If you had a crazy idea, you would keep that to yourself. Because if you spouted off such insane ramblings, you wouldn't be invited to things anymore. You'd be the weirdo of the town. So there was a self-moderation that happened because you didn't want to lose connection with people because connection was important. But now, thanks to the internet, there's some Facebook group of some nuts equally as nutty as you that give you this feeling of unity, right? You're like, oh, I don't need all these people in my town. I don't need all these people in my community. I don't need all these people in my church. I don't need any civic or local community organizations to be a part of. I have this Facebook group that I can be a part of. So you get this fake feeling of unity, but then on top of that, you also get this feeling of victimhood because these people start talking like, oh, your tribe, group, town, work, church, whatever, they're ostracizing you too. You're not getting invited to kids' birthday parties either. Oh, we're all victims. And now these victims can unite together like never before, and that's where you get more political unrest, to say the least. Back in the day, pre-internet, these people couldn't communicate with each other like this, could not unite, and now they can mobilize much easier. It's a problem. Extreme people, and then we talked about this the other day. When did this come up the other day? I forget how it came up, but if you take someone with a view, and it's left and right, it doesn't matter. Let's say you take someone, well, let's just do guns. If you take someone pro-gun, and you put them in a group of people who are pro-gun, that person and the group become even more pro-gun. If you take someone who's anti-gun and you put them in a group of people who are anti-gun, that person and the group as a whole become more anti-gun. So when you isolate into groups with the same thought, they become more of that thing, right? They head in that direction. That's not great. Extreme people can link together like never before. We're lonelier than ever before. We're more isolated than ever before. I mean, every force around us is constantly dividing us all the time in every conceivable way possible. I found this the other day. Do we have the, do you guys have the text on that, the flag? You got the flag? Let me pull this up so I can read this. You know, you got like the gay pride flag and the transgender flag and all this stuff. This right here, what you're looking at is the female to female transgender pride flag. A female to female. This is a trans woman who considers herself transitioning from female to female, as she has always been female, just not in the way being female is traditionally defined as. Okay, so this is a woman who's transitioning to being a woman, and I guess can still be considered transgender or something. What? Right, so that's like a new dividing line. Like you can now, that's how divided we are. Like here's this little subset of person who's a female transitioning to female, and they get their own flag. And again, as Hannah Arendt said, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazis, not the convinced communists. It's people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction and true and false no longer exist. Gender being just one of those examples. We have that in spades today. When there's no such thing as truth, when you have no perspective, right? Trump taking his mask off is one of the great horrors of history, right? And when there's no God, where else could these people go, right? Of course they're going to become more extreme and radicalized. Fortunately, you know the truth. You have proper perspective. And you know God too. You'll be okay. And you have gold. I read a God, guns, and gold. That's what that's the 3 Gs. Read a headline the other day that gold may hit a record high before the year end on election risk. Citi warns, C-I-T-I, Citibank warns. And I read that and I thought, warns? It's not a bad thing. It's time to go get gold. Go buy some gold. We're not going to be in a great time for our country in the next a couple months, right? 28 days now away from the election. We're not going to know the results for a while afterwards. What do you think the markets are going to do in that time? It's going to be totally out of control. It's not going to be good. Buy gold. Have gold in your hands. And also think about a gold IRA too. So the why is obvious. Who is the question? Patriot Gold Group. They are America's highest rated precious metal investment firm by Consumer Affairs, Retirement Living, A+ Better Business Bureau, AAA Business Consumer Alliance, 5 stars from the Consumer Affairs, 4 years running. I mean, it's the top line in every single category possible. We got to do this. In times of chaos, in times of turmoil and upheaval, which we're in the middle of right now, gold will always be the smart choice. And we are about running out of time. But if you call now, you can still get it in time before it all completely hits the fan. Give a call for a free investor's guide. 1-800-798, got the number right here, 4260. Patriot Gold Group, 1-800-798-4260. Have that gold in your hands. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we've talked a lot about the state of, well, the country, the state of the church, certainly, and where both of those are heading. And let's get some data on that. Dr. George Barna is the Director of Research at the Cultural Research Center of Arizona Christian University. And every year they put out this thing called the American Worldview Inventory. And, well, I don't know. I want to find some good news out of it, but let's break down what we know so far. Dr. Barna, how are you, sir?
Doing great.
I'm sure we can find some good news somewhere, but I didn't see much of it. But alas, give me some headlines here first, and then we'll break down some of this stuff.
The reality is that when we look at the worldview in America that people possess, traditionally it's been driven by biblical truth, by Christian perspectives. That's no longer the case in America. Very few people have a biblical worldview, only 6% of adults across America. And as we look at it generationally, we see that it's been declining from generation to succeeding generation, to the point where when we look at millennials now, we've only got about 2% that have a biblical worldview.
Amazing. What kind of questions do you ask? How do you ask these questions?
Well, actually, there are 51 different questions. Half of them are about beliefs, half of them relate to behavior. Then the reason that we check behavior and not just beliefs, like a lot of tests do, is because if you don't do it, you don't really believe it. So we look at the behavior as the confirmation of the belief that it's really meaningful to you. You're not just saying that, it's what you, how you live. And totally. So when we look at these things, we're looking at their perspectives on God, on Jesus, on sin, on the Bible, on relationships with other people, on the meaning of life, their purpose in life, success, how they would define it, all of these kinds of things.
Can you give me a behavior question?
If we talk about different scenarios in life, we had a whole series of these. Whether or not, for instance, if you took a loan from a wealthy relative, would you feel compelled to pay it back? Or would you just keep the money saying, well, really, I need the money more than they do? Well, you've made a promise to them that you would repay it. And yet we found an extraordinary number of people in America said, I need the money more than they do, so I'm not going to repay it. Another example, would you tell a lie if it was in your best interest to do so, if it would protect your reputation, if it would advance your career, those kinds of things. Again, large numbers of people said that lying is okay if the circumstances facilitate your own better outcomes, those types of things.
On that first story about the loan, I'm reminded of a story, and I forget who it was, but it was a slave. Maybe you know the story. It was a slave, and he bought his freedom from his owner, went up north, but owed his former master money. Then the Emancipation Proclamation happened, and he still owed his master money and went back down to repay the last of the debt of his freedom. And everyone around him was like, what are you doing? Like, you're free, like the emancipation. And he's like, oh no, like I made my word. Like I'm gonna give him $100 and I owed him another $20 or whatever. Like, what? Like that's, that's unbelievable. And that's just like the ultimate of that story. Right. But I'm glad you asked that question. So, okay, what is a biblical worldview? Because obviously a lot of denominations and whatever. So how do you guys define biblical to make that claim that only 2% of millennials have one?
Sure. And just the bigger picture is that everybody has a worldview. And what we're talking about is the mental, emotional, spiritual filter that we have for decision making. Everybody has to make decisions all day long, and there's got to be some basis on which you make it. So from about 15 months of age to about the age of 13, a person has to figure out, who do I want to be? How am I going to live successfully in this world? What does it take to be who I want to be? And it's your worldview that's the compilation of all the ideas, the beliefs, the experiences that help you to figure out what that worldview is going to be. A biblical worldview is one where what you've decided is that the Bible contains the truth principles that will help me to make all those kinds of decisions. So in other words, all the choices that you're going to make, you go back to the Bible and try to figure out, is there a biblical principle that informs my actions in this situation? And if so, then I've got a choice. Do I either follow the Bible or do I follow my feelings? Do I follow the culture? Do I follow some other worldview, whether it's Marxism, postmodernism, existentialism, whatever it may be? And so with a biblical worldview, we're looking for most, if not all, of your choices to be driven by biblical teachings.
Okay, I love that answer. 15 months. So I'm fascinated by this time zone, mostly because I have a 4-year-old this week and a 2.5-year-old and a 7-month-old. So
Get busy,
I'm right
buddy.
in this
Get busy.
sweet. I'm in this sweet spot here. 15 months seems very early. What happens at 15 months?
Well, 15 to 18 months of age is when they start to understand bits and pieces of language, when they may be in a room where a television is on or a computer screen is in their view, and they begin to understand what's going on with some of those images. They haven't fully developed their logic. That comes over time. But again, this is just the starting point of when those things are beginning in their lives. And so it's the first moment that they're starting to make sense of the world. And that's what a worldview does. It helps you to make sense of the world and your place in it, and then determines what kind of responses you want to have to that world.
Yeah, good. What are some of the most influential influences that most people have today? So if not the Bible, what other forces are coming at us? And there's some obvious ones, and I list those please too. But what are some maybe more insidious ones that we may not be aware of?
Yeah, well, by far the most powerful ones in America today are the media, whether it's television or books or music or any of the different arts and entertainment sources, news and information sources. All of those have worldview messages. And so when you look at the enormous amount of time that Americans spend glued to their media sources, whatever it may be, social media or whatever, that's where most of their worldview cues are coming from. Children are virtually defenseless in this. They don't know good worldview from bad worldview. And so they're taking it all in as if they're of equal value. But it's not just the media. Their parents have tremendous influence on them. So what a parent does has a big influence, although I have to also point out that in America today, only 5% of the parents of children under the age of 13 have a biblical worldview. And you can't give what you don't have. So they're probably not going to get a biblical worldview from their parents. They're almost certainly not going to get it from the media. Another big impact, which many people overlook, is the government. And people would say, but the government has no interaction with young children. Of course it does, because the law is the way that a society codifies its worldview. And so basically what the law is doing is it's telling us what's right or wrong, because we punish you when you do right. We reward you when you, punish you when you do wrong, reward you when you do right. That's what the job of the law is. So government also plays a huge role in all this. And of course, with children, school and their peers also are significant influencers.
Wow. I'm just thinking of kids just getting bombarded with things nonstop that just have no semblance. So maybe where a parent back in the day didn't have a biblical worldview, maybe they could kind of grab onto something at school or something watching some TV show or something in the neighborhood, right? Or something from the president or something. But geez, you almost get it nowhere now, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at kids today, they're basically looking for clues. It's like, how am I supposed to live? What am I supposed to think? What do I do in these situations? And so they watch movies, they watch television, they watch their friends. You know, it used to be that they could go to school and teachers had a set of values that they wanted their children to embrace. And they shared that perspective with parents. It's no longer the case in our schools. And in fact, you've got many schools that claim they give a values-free education, which is impossible, but that's the goal that they're striving for. So you've got all of these mixed messages now that they're getting. And the biggest message of all that they're getting, perhaps, is do whatever feels good. If you think it's right for you, because that's how our society now defines truth. What you believe to be right for you. Nobody can tell you right or wrong. You're the only one who can dictate that for your life. The Bible may identify actions or beliefs that it claims are truthful, but if you don't feel it, then it's not right for you. So it's a different kind of day and age than when I was growing up.
Yeah, speak on that again. I go a little deeper here. So feelings, everything's so feelings-based. What is the biblical worldview on that? And how does the Bible suggest we should deal with our feelings as opposed to truth? Because as you said, right now it's, if I feel it, it's true. And not only if I was born this way, and it's who I am, and who are you to say, right? So it's all feelings-based. So what's the biblical approach instead, the biblical worldview?
Yeah, is not to trust your feelings, because your feelings can be manipulated. The whole idea in the Bible is that there is absolute moral truth, meaning that in a given circumstance, the Bible will teach you this is the proper approach, this is an improper approach, as opposed to your feelings, which have been manipulated by the culture around you so that you feel certain responses are appropriate, even though empirically, factually, they may not be. That's one of the hallmarks of postmodernism, which may be the reigning worldview in America today. And one of the core or foundational beliefs of postmodernism is that there is not and cannot be such a thing as absolute moral truth. Every individual determines his or her own truth given their circumstances and how they feel about the conditions and circumstances. And it changes from person to person. There are no absolutes that overwhelm the circumstances. There are no absolutes that you can count on for every person in the same situation. So that's partly what makes it such a confusing day and age culturally, is that moral anarchy is essentially part of the worldview that most Americans have now moved to. We used to be a society that said, yes, there are moral foundations. Lying is lying. It's always wrong. Stealing is stealing. It's always wrong. But in a postmodern world, no, it depends on the individual and their circumstances to determine whether or not stealing is appropriate. They would say that the law has nothing to do with that. It's your own law, who you are, how you feel, that determines it.
And if you and I suggest otherwise, we're bigots, right? We're a bigot. And who are you to throw your Bible into my face about whatever, right? I get that all the time. Doctor, I got a ton more questions. You got a few more minutes for us? Can we stick around and do another quick segment?
Let's do it. Yes, sir.
Dr. George Barnett, where can people read this report and learn more about all your research?
culturalresearchcenter.com. All the reports are there. We got about a dozen of them. You can download them, share them. It's all there for you.
Yeah, culturalresearchcenter.com. Okay, beautiful. All right, more coming up. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I got a lot more questions for Dr. George Barnett, quite frankly. They're selfish questions because I have a 4-year-old this week and then a 2 and 7 months or so girl, and then my youngest son is 7 or 8 months or so. So we're right in the sweet spot here. Doctor, you said earlier, you talked about the 15 months to 13 years. And you said in that time period, kids are asking, who do I want to be and what does it take? Those are two super, super fascinating questions. Especially the what does it take one. So let's do the first one. Who do I want to be? Have you studied that over time? Because, people bemoaned before about the fact that kids only today want to be basketball players. And, have you studied the difference in that over time? And what are the influences that go into kids coming up with that answer?
Yeah, the critical dimension there we've found is that it really all has to do with character. And so as we studied parenting and what happened as a result of their parenting of their children, we found that those that grew up to be, if you will, great human beings, the kind of people that everybody looks at and says, nah, that's a good person. Well, what made them that kind of person? It was because their parents went back to the Bible, and there are a number of different character traits that are taught there. First of all, these parents recognized that the Bible says the single most important thing you will do in your life is how you raise your children. You need to raise them up to be godly individuals, which means that they understand biblical principles and they embrace those as the heart of who they want to become. And when we talk about who they want to become, it's about being a good character, a Christ-like individual, someone who's forgiving, someone who's respectful, someone who's compassionate, someone who is truthful, someone who works hard, someone who, when they work, they believe it's important that they do an excellent job at whatever it is that they're doing. I mean, all of these kinds of things are some of the character traits that the Bible teaches. And so for parents to always be looking for teachable moments where they can say, well, I understand why you did that, but here's a different way of thinking about it. Here's why you should think about it differently. Here's what it looks like in my life and in their spouse's life. Here's what could have happened if you had behaved in this way. Having those kinds of teaching moments. And by the way, we also found that the best kind of approach to that is to be very Socratic, which means that you're not simply dumping biblical truth on a child, but you're asking them questions about why they do what they do and trying to get them to understand, oh, there was another way to do it. It would have made a difference. And going through that whole process of getting them to own that idea, not just dumping it on them and saying, take it because I said it's right, but helping them to understand why it's right and what the implications of that rightness will be for them over the course of their life.
So good. So what does the world say? So you talked, obviously, the biblical characteristics, right? What is the world pumping at young kids today instead?
That it's all about your feelings. If you feel like being nice to somebody, be nice. If you're not feeling nice this morning, don't worry about it. You have to be true to yourself. And so there's a whole different way of looking at what matters. In a biblical worldview, what matters is God. He is the center of everything. He created us in his image. He created us for a purpose. He gave us a rule book, which we know is the Bible. The world would say, no. Life revolves around you. If you ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And so you got to make sure that you're doing what's best for you, what takes care of you, even if it harms other people. They won't quite throw that part in, but even if it harms other people, as long as you're feeling good about yourself, you can go on and be the person that you want to be. Biblical worldview would say, no, you actually can't, because you have a conscience, which is God's spirit placed within you because you were made in his image. That will make you feel uncomfortable. That will make you feel like something is off here. And you won't be able to put your finger on it, and you probably won't bother, because then the next opportunity is going to come along. The next challenge is going to come along. And without even thinking about it, you're moving on and doing all these things that relate to your feelings. So you got to start with what's really proper. And it's about God and his principles, which he gave to us for our well-being, for our own good, so that we would enjoy the maximum joy in life.
I hope everyone listening here is watching is like the fruit of this is so obvious in our culture today. The bad fruit of everything you're talking about. It's so clear on the streets. It's so obvious. Okay, so the second part of that is who do I want to be? And I love how you took that. It's not just profession. It's like, what kind of person do I want to be? But then what does it take? That's a super interesting question, because that reminds me of, who's the author, Wild at Heart?
John Eldridge.
Very good, thank you. And that's one of the questions he asks a lot about men. Men ask, they're always asking, do I have what it takes? So how do you interpret that? When a kid asks, do I have what it takes? What does that mean to them?
Well, to me, it goes back to a different question, which is, well, what is success in life? And one of the things that a biblical worldview helps you understand is that success isn't about your salary. It's not about your title. It's not about your homes and your boats and your women and all the rest of it. It's about obedience to God. Because the reason that we're here on earth is to know, love, and serve God. Well, if that's the case, then my job is to be obedient to the principles that he gave us that not only bring honor and respect and praise and glory to him, but in doing so, it gives me a sense of self-worth. It gives me my identity. I'm a child of God. I've been placed here to know him and enjoy him and to do the things that he set out specifically for me. There's no guesswork here. God knows these things and he wants me to succeed. So all I have to do is get in tune with him, work with the principles that he's given to us for that purpose, and I'm going to have the ultimate life. As we do our interviews with adults across the country, one of the things that we find when we interview older people, people in the waning years of their life, is that so many of them who did not live with a biblical worldview have a tendency to look back and wonder, gee, what if I had gone down that other path that some of my friends did who have a biblical worldview and who right now don't have the same kind of doubts and fears and anxieties that I do about how I live my life, about what's going to happen to me after I'm done with this life. I mean, they still have a sense of joy and anticipation about life. And so it's an interesting kind of set of bookends where we look at parents with young children, we look at people who are at the ends of their lives and realize that they're deep, deep down inside of us. We kind of know these things, but often we put a lid on it due to selfishness. So we've got to make sure that selfishness is not the thing that drives us.
Yeah, really good. Okay, let me do devil's advocate. So I tend to fall in this very like Jeremiah. I fall for these Jeremiahs a lot, right? It's like the times now are worse than ever, and that appeals to me. But I don't know, is that true? Like, right, like maybe things have always been bad, and who's just like there's like a nostalgia, right? I think we have like this nostalgia for the days that were in the 50s or whatever, that were so much more biblically centered. So what do you say to that argument of like, oh, things aren't really that much worse? People have been saying this forever and ever and ever and ever, that these are the end times, and that generation, that next generation, they're a bunch of hooligans. Is this really any different, or is it much worse?
Well, it's different, yes. I don't know if it's better or worse. I can tell you based on the research that it's probably worse in terms of the incidence of people, at least in our country, who have a biblical worldview. It's incredibly low and getting lower. And so, yeah, that's not good. But my other response to all that is I don't really care that much about history in terms of was it better or worse than today. Today is the only thing I've got. So I've got to work with the situation that I'm in, and I'd like to make it better. So there's a challenge to me. I know that it could be better regardless of what it used to be in the past. And so what's my job? If my greatest job is to raise my children to be the ultimate Christ follower that they can be, to be the ultimate individual with a biblical worldview, who by virtue of that has a goal of making everything around them better. It's the Genesis 12 principle of you've been blessed to be a blessing. God doesn't give you blessings simply so that you can have more for yourself. He gives you those blessings so that you can pass them on to others. You can all enjoy them together. It's not about you, it's about him. And so let's give him the glory for the fact that he blessed me and I get to bless you. What a great thing. So if that's my perspective, I'm not worried about are we doing better than the past? Because let's say that we decide, yeah, it's better now than it was 60 years ago. Well, then that gives me the impetus to coast, to just take it easy and say, yeah, but we're better than so-and-so. Well, who cares? Or I could look at another country, well, we're better than the Iranians. No. I mean, in God's eyes, it's like, what's the nature of my relationship with him? Do I buy his line, if you will? And am I pursuing it? If I am, then good, I'm on the right track. If I'm not, I'm no better than anybody else.
So good. I love that. I'm thinking of two different parallel universes. One where individuals and a society collectively embrace that Genesis 12 principle you talked about, where you're not the center of the universe and your blessings are meant to bestow upon others, versus the society we have today, which is you're the center of the universe, we'll do whatever you want. Like, those are like two completely different universes X number of years down the road. It's wild. 30 seconds, sir. You've been super generous with your time. I appreciate you. What's your encouragement to people who would maybe be called a bigot, even when they present the truth as graciously and factually as you have today, but still called a bigot for X number of reasons?
Well, you don't worry about it, because I don't answer to other people. I answer to a holy, righteous, and truthful God. And so knowing that someday he will judge me, that's what I need to be concerned about. Did I live my life in such a way that I think he'll judge me as having given my best effort to know him, to love him, to serve him through my consistent obedience to his principles? If I've done that and the world hates me, they did the same thing with Jesus. So I'm in good company.
Beautiful. Dr. George Barna, Cultural Research Center.com, and then go read the American Worldview Inventory, which was the start of this conversation. Doctor, honor to talk to you, sir. Please keep up the wonderful work.
Great to be with you, and good luck with your children.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Well, with your help. True story, Mike Slater. See you tomorrow. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we kicked off the show talking about perspective, then we just talked about worldview. I want to go back to perspective here for just a second. This is the CBS News White House correspondent, Ben Tracy. He said, I felt safer. He's like a young guy. He's like 40 years old. I felt safer reporting in North Korea than I currently do reporting at the White House. This is just crazy, in reference to COVID. Like, something I've been touching on this for a little bit. We got to do a whole hour. There's two things. We got to do a whole hour on tribes and how we were made to live in tribes. And now with the internet, our brains and souls were not designed for how we interact with each other today. And it's creating a lot of problems. I also want to talk about making up movies in your head. We talked a ton about this on my radio show back in 2016. And it's still a thing. And again, there's a whole thing to it, but the gist is we all make up movies in our heads. Our brains need to have a complete picture of an event that occurred. The problem is we don't have good memories. So we just fill in the blanks with whatever we want. This is why eyewitness testimony of a crime scene is basically worthless. Because we just all make stuff up. You can have 100 people see the same crime with 100 different descriptions of what happened. Think back to something, I was gonna say like something from high school or something like that, but like something last week even. But some strong memory from your life, right? Something where you're like, oh, I could remember it like it was yesterday. No, you don't. You think you do. You're very confident that you do. But you've reconstructed that memory to make it complete after the fact. You remember maybe one thing about it, but then you fill in all the blanks after the fact and you make up this movie in your head. We all do it. If you could like hook up your brain to some system where you imagine something like this great memory you have of your life or some childhood or whatever, and if they could be transmitted to a TV screen and the color of everything and the scene and what people are wearing and everything's like exactly how you imagine it. And then if you could play actual footage of what happened, they'd be two totally different things. Now, this doesn't make you a bad person. We all do it. It's just the fact of it. You just got to recognize. That's the problem when people don't even recognize it. Now, the real issue is our brains have gotten so good at making up movies in our head about memories and filling in details. We do it with things that we weren't even there for. Does that make sense? So it's one thing to make up this memory and fill in the blanks with like something from your childhood, like was it your childhood memory? But it's another thing to just make up stuff all the time that you weren't there with, and therefore, and that's what people are doing all the time. The now infamous Rose Garden Massacre, as some people are calling it, the Supreme Court nominee ceremony where a bunch of Republicans spread the virus around, right? Again, lack of perspective there, calling it the Rose Garden Massacre. But you have no idea what happened. You have no idea. You weren't there. You don't know what the president does to stay and keep a distance from people, to not be around a lot of people when inside. You have no idea how much testing they do in the White House. I mean, when one of your friends or whatever, when they're freaking out about Trump, this, whatever, make this point very clear to them. You have no idea. You have no idea. You're making it up. You're making up a movie inside your head and then you're getting mad about it. Right? Everyone's acting like the president personally was acting so recklessly. You have no idea what he does. He's a germaphobe anyway, right? He hates shaking hands as it is. But people are just they're acting like the president just had a steady stream of random strangers from the street coming into the Oval Office all day, just sneezing on everyone nonstop. You're making it up. And then you get mad at your own delusion. You're getting mad at him for the movie you made up in your own head. And that's the kind of thing I said that I can't deal with that anymore. I can't stress out. I can't stress about debunking things you make up in your head. It's another example. People freaking out about he got in his car and drove around and wove to the people outside of the hospital the other day, right? And everyone, all the people on the left, so concerned about the Secret Service agents inside the car and how he put them at risk. They may die. I've heard people say, right? You have no idea. You have no idea what happened inside that car. You're making it all up. You don't know how many Secret Service agents there were. I mean, we'll start with that. How many you're so upset about him making the Secret Service agents, putting them at risk. How many were there? You don't even know that. So how can you that's the most basic thing to know, is how many were in there. How many were in the car? You don't know. Okay, what masks were they wearing? Do you know? They could have been wearing gas masks. I don't know. They could have been wearing like oxygen tank masks. Who knows? There could have been a plexiglass screen between the president and the Secret Service agents. You don't know. Maybe the Secret Service agents were very young. Maybe they already had COVID and they're immune to it. You don't know. You're making it up. Be on the lookout for people who are making up movies in their heads and then getting mad about it. And honestly, I don't know what to do with that, because if you confront them with it, they're just gonna get mad at you. So the only thing I can think to do right now is just to let them live in their delusion. Maybe bring up the fact that they're making it all up. I don't think it's gonna do any good, not these last 29 days. Let them live in their delusions. We deal with the truth here. True story. Mike Slater. See you tomorrow. Spread the word.